Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Hey there, it's Molly, and welcome back to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist. Think Thursdays are all about our beautiful, brilliant human brains. And today we're talking about something that is near and dear to my heart. We are going to be talking about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or otherwise known as ADHD. And we're going to talk about specifically how brains that process the world differently also manage their energy differently. And this is personal for me because two of my sons and my husband all are on the spectrum for ADHD. And I see every day how the ADHD's brain fuel its budget works in real time and how different that budget is from most of us that think of our brains as normal or neurotypical, which I'm going to define right here. Neurotypical is a word that you hear describing brains that function in ways that society generally expects, able to focus on command, follow routines, regulate attention, and stay on task without much extra effort. Neurodivergent, on the other hand, refers to brains that work differently, whether that's ADHD or autism or dyslexia or other variations. These brains aren't broken or less than, they just process information, regulate attention, and spend energy in ways that diverge from the typical pattern. Neurodivergent and neurotypical. And that difference in processing has a direct impact on what I call the brain's energy economy. How much fuel it takes to get through a day and why tasks feel so different for different brains. So, in this episode, we'll talk about why the brain is such an energy hog, what happens in ADHD brains specifically, why there's a connection between ADHD and addiction, and what tools can help ADHD brains spend their energy more wisely. All right, let's get into it. So, I've said this before on Think Thursday episodes. I may have said it on the big podcast too, but the human brain makes up about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes about 20% of your body's energy at rest. That's a huge metabolic demand. Most of this fuel comes from glucose, and most of it goes toward constant background work, sending signals, maintaining networks, and keeping, us alive, right? You can think of your brain like a budget. You wake up each day with a certain amount of mental fuel, and everything you do, decisions, focus, emotional regulation, spends that currency. For neurotypical brains, habits and routines run efficiently like automatic withdrawals. They don't take much thought or energy. But for neurodivergent brains like ADHD, the budget is structured differently. And that's where things get interesting. ADHD is linked to differences in dopamine and norepinephrine signaling, especially in the prefrontal cortex. We've talked about the prefrontal cortex many times. That's the area of the brain which manages planning and impulse control. It also is linked to differences in that dopamine and norepinephrine signaling in the striatum, which is where the drive for reward and motivation is. So the prefrontal cortex and the striatum, these areas of the brain are impacted from ADHD and the dopamine and norepinephrine signaling. And here's what it looks like in daily life. So for someone with ADHD, routine tasks cost more. Neurotypical brains can automate basics, paying bills, brushing teeth, filing papers at low cost. ADHD brains struggle to automate. So those tasks drain more fuel. So neurotypical brains can automate basic things, and neurodivergent, it is harder to automate and it takes more fuel. Novelty feels cheaper to a neurodivergent brain. New or stimulating tasks release dopamine, so they feel energizing instead of exhausting. And this is why hyperfocus happens. It's not willpower, it is literally the reward system lighting up. So when a new task or something intriguing uh, captures an ADHD brain, that's what happens. They don't hyper focus on it because they have a lot of willpower. It's actually because the reward system is lighting up. Regulation is expensive. Sitting still, managing impulses, keeping emotions in check all cost more for ADHD brains. So think about that. Think about what I think about this often with kids in school, especially for ADHD brains, sitting still and trying to manage just staying still and managing the impulse of curiosity, all of that, it costs more for the ADHD brain. And lastly, mind wandering leaks fuel. The default mode network, the system that is active when we daydream, has trouble shutting off in ADHD. And that means even at rest, fuel gets burned on background chatter. So ADHD isn't laziness or lack of motivation or a lack of willpower. It's a different energy economy where some tasks are overpriced and others are deeply discounted, and fuel leaks can happen even when you're not doing anything. This difference in fuel budget also helps explain why ADHD and addiction are linked. Research shows that people with ADHD are about 2 to 3 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder than the general population. Alcohol is one of the most common, not only because it's widely accessible, but partly because it boosts dopamine in the short term, and partly because it takes the edge off of overstimulation. And of course, here's the tricky part. Because ADHD brains already have underactive dopamine systems, alcohol feels especially effective at creating balance. But the relief is, of course, temporary, and the brain learns quickly to reach for that shortcut. That doesn't mean everyone with ADHD will struggle with alcohol, but it does mean that there's a vulnerability. And I think it's important to be aware of that. The same wiring that makes boring tasks feel exhausting can make alcohol feel like an easy dopamine fix. Here's the good news. ADHD brains are also highly responsive to healthy dopamine strategies: movement, novelty, creativity, and structure. Those can become protective factors, reducing reliance on substances. The key here is neuroplasticity, that thing we talk about all the time, the brain's ability to rewire itself with repeated experience. ADHD brains may always run on a different budget, but that doesn't mean they're doomed to inefficiency. They can learn new systems that conserve and redirect energy. For example, offloading memory onto lists or reminder shifts the burden from working memory to the environment. So, using, you know, checklists, using tools to help you stay on track, adding novelty to dull tasks like music, a timer, a new location, engages dopamine systems and lowers the cost. Consistent recovery practices like sleep, movement, downtime, They strengthen the prefrontal cortex and improve regulation. They are important for all of us. I've talked about many times sleep, movement, downtime, how important they are. They are even more important, if not critical, for ADHD brains. The point isn't to make an ADHD brain neurotypical. The point is to work with the budget it has, not against it. Here are 6 strategies that research shows can really make a difference. They are practical tools for the ADHD energy economy. As I just said, number 1, externalize memory. Write it down, put it on a whiteboard, set a timer. Every external reminder frees up fuel in the brain's memory system. Number 2, reduce friction. Make the next right action as easy as possible. Keys by the door, bills automated, meals prepared in advance. Number 3, use novelty as a lever. Pair boring tasks with music, a timer, or a race. Novelty helps recruit dopamine. Number 4, break things down. Chunk tasks into micro steps and celebrate each one. Small wins give dopamine hits that build momentum. Number 5, try body doubling. Working alongside someone else, even silently, provides structure and accountability, and that conserves energy. And number 6, protect recovery. Sleep, exercise, downtime. They aren't luxuries, they are refueling stops, and ADHD brains need them even more. Here's the most important takeaway. When you see ADHD through the lens of an energy economy, compassion replaces judgment. It's not that someone with ADHD won't do something, they often can't in that moment just because the fuel just isn't there. And once you understand that, the focus shifts from blame to strategy. I know in my own family, this has been a game changer. When my husbands or my sons struggle with something that looks basic, I remind myself it's not about effort, it's about energy. And it's the most supportive thing I can do to help them conserve, redirect, or refuel. So here's the big picture. The brain is an energy hungry organ, and ADHD brains run that budget differently. That doesn't make them broken, it makes them unique. And it means they thrive with systems designed for their energy economy. When we understand ADHD this way, we move away from frustration and toward compassion, creativity, and peace. That's all I have for you this week, my friends. Until next time, choose peace, and I will see you on Monday.